Hello, everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of an intro to if-then statements. For those of you who have done proof before, you're probably familiar with this. Oftentimes these are introduced in a geometry class, but this is also kind of getting into some things that we're going to use in the first chapter. So I thought I would just talk briefly about that. So an if-then statement is sometimes referred to as a conditional. And our conditionals often have what we call a truth value of either true or false. And so I'm going to give you a statement that is a true statement. So a true statement would be, if the sun is in the sky, then it is daytime. Okay? And we're going to call, that is definitely a true statement. Whoops, that was not what I intended. I'm going to leave that. We're not going to repeat it. So, oh, that's why. There we go. Sorry. True statement. Okay, so when we talk about if-then statements, and we have a conditional like this, this first part is referred to as the hypothesis, and the second part after the then is called the conclusion. So what we're saying is that the sun is in the sky is true, then daytime has to be true, and when that's true, the whole statement is true. There's some other instances where a conditional is considered a true statement, which is a little less obvious, but this isn't a logic course, so we're not going to get into that. Now there's three other versions of the conditional that we can write. The first of those is referred to as an inverse. And in the case of an inverse, all we're doing is we're taking each of the statements, the hypothesis and the conclusion, and we are what we refer to as negating it. So we would say, if the sun is not in the sky, so we take the opposite of the statement. If the original statement had a not in it, we just take the not out. Then it is not daytime. And you might be like, well, that seems like that's obviously true. But we could say, how do we define sun in the sky? Well, what if we have an overcast day where we can't see the sun? We know it's up there, but if we can't see the sun, does that mean it's not daytime? No, of course not. It's still daytime. It's just that we can't see the sun. So if the original statement is true, it does not automatically mean that the inverse statement is true. Okay, so keep that in mind. The next one we talked about is called the converse. And in this case, the converse, we just take the original hypothesis and conclusion and we flip them. So now it becomes, if it is daytime, then the sun is in the sky. And you might see that this is a similar one to when we talked about the inverse, because if it's daytime, perhaps we have an overcast day, so we don't see the sun in it. Okay, so again, this statement is not necessarily true if the first original conditional is true. Okay, but then the next thing, and the last one we're going to look at, and this one is kind of the point that we're getting to in the chapter. It's a statement called the contrapositive, and this particular statement is used when we talk about proof by contradiction. So the contrapositive, so you'll notice that the original conditional statement, the inverse negated both of the statements, the hypothesis and the conclusion. The converse flipped them both. The contrapositive does both at the same time. So it both negates them and flips them. So our contrapositive statement looks like this. If it is not daytime, then the sun is not in the sky. And it turns out that if the original statement is true, so is the contrapositive. Okay, so think about that for a minute. If the original statement, so that's this statement up here, if that one's true, then the contrapositive is also true. And if the first statement is false, then the contrapositive is also false. So when we talk about proof by contradiction, we're actually using the contrapositive version of the original statement in order to prove it. If we can prove the contrapositive, we're essentially proving the original statement. Okay, so we'll see more about that. Hope that helps, and talk to you later.